I've been seeing a lot of fall themed posts on Instagram lately, and while it's not exactly fall where I live, it's been quite cool and cozy, which has made getting out of bed kinda difficult. But we're here, so in this video I'm gonna be showing you my painting process for days 6, 7, 8, and 9. The first prompt was rodent, and I have to admit I was uninspired by this prompt. Yeah, it's not exactly a word that inspires good thoughts. Brings to mind the images of sewers and dung and all those nasty stuff. So there was a quote that I wanted to share, which was "Inspiration strikes every 9 a.m." Or something like that. I tried to look into it, who said it, but apparently there were a lot of sources, so I don't really know who to credit. Suffice to say, this means that you just have to show up for your work and inspiration will come. So although I didn't really feel any affinity towards this word, I just started drawing, and through that process, I guess it brought back memories from when I was a kid and we would be watching Tom and Jerry. When I was young, I would always find this very funny whenever Jerry would hit Tom or outsmart him. But growing up, now that I watch it as an adult, I kind of pity Tom, and I think I've switched sides. The show is kind of representative of how sibling rivalry works. Me and my brother have always been competitive with each other, or at least I felt that way. Not like I could ever win with my brother, but I remember our caretaker saying that we would always fight like cats and dogs. And as I've mentioned in the previous video, this was because of our contrasting personalities. Probably because I could relate to being the one that's always on the losing end. I usually side with the underdogs. A few thoughts on the process of this piece. I was very bold and laid down too dark of a value on our skin tones. Fortunately, as I continued on painting, it wasn't as evident, but there was a moment when I laid that first shade down that I went into a frenzy of panic, thinking if I should just scrap this and redraw it, but I didn't want to. Honestly, I didn't have time to redo the piece, and I didn't really want to trace another one because of one mistake. So I chose to just work through it, and it ended up looking quite nicely. I still need a lot of practice with this watercolor metallic paint. It always comes out very streaky, but I'm figuring out a little bit how to work around that. I find that if I lay down a thick coat of watercolor, it is less evident, my brush strokes I mean, and comes to a nicer flat wash. I've also found a use for the calligraphy ink that I bought in walnut shade from Craft Central. While it doesn't really work well for line work because of its translucency, it actually provides a very good second layer for my metallic paints. I realized that mixing the metallic paints with each other doesn't really give you a good depth of value, so this was a perfect solution, and at least I wasn't wasting any of my art supplies, so yay for me. The next word was fancy, and I have to admit, again, this was not an easy word to come up with an illustration on. I had to shelve this at the back of my mind for a few days, honestly, just mulling it over, because the only image that really popped into my head was these fancy dresses and button-down shirts that my brother and I would wear whenever we would eat out with our grandparents. We used to have a lot of family gatherings when we were kids. Almost every weekend we would take our grandparents to a fancy restaurant which required fancy clothes, but I found that idea kind of too realistic and staid, I guess is the word, quite boring to illustrate. So I began to question, well, who else wears fancy clothes? Princesses was something that I thought of, but then that wasn't as interesting until I struck upon an idea of magicians. Well, magicians kind of always wore those very formal top hat penguin suits, so I went with that. It kind of fits perfectly with my motif theme of childhood adventures, because when we were kids we would often get bored, especially in these big family celebrations, and our uncles would be entertaining us with doing magic tricks. We would be so fascinated as kids trying to figure out how they did those things. We would spend what felt like hours with these uncles trying to recreate the tricks that they were doing. My brother in particular actually bought a book on magic tricks, if you could believe it. I can't quite remember the contents of it, but there were various different tricks. Mostly though, it talked about card tricks, and it kind of clicked in my mind that anything actually could be learned, even magic. I don't think we ever mastered any of those teachings, but it was a fun little book that we had. The magic 8-ball that's at the center of the illustration is actually another hidden egg, I guess. I remember this toy that we had, and I don't even know why we had it or who gave it, but I really loved asking questions to that magic 8-ball. There was a scene when Woody was stuck and asking the 8-ball for answers, whether he should do one thing or another, and he was so frustrated that he threw the ball because of its answer. I think it was around the time when he was shelved in favor of Buzz Lightyear or something. Again, showing that dynamic between sibling rivalry. I guess this is really why I liked those shows back then. I could relate very strongly to these characters. Next, we have the prompt teeth, and I guess you could say I cheated a little bit, but I couldn't really think of anything for teeth. Maybe I should have drawn something in Alice in Wonderland with the Cheshire Cat. It wasn't really a big show, at least in my memories, so I went with Tooth Fairy instead. When we were kids, we loved candy, as in my grandmother would spoil us rotten, literally. One specific candy that I remember back then was these candy rings. So you have these plastic rings, and on top of it is actually candy that you can suck on as you go, and it was such a messy thing. Honestly, while it's ingenious to do that, because it's like combining a toy with candy, which is like every kid's dream, it's honestly not healthy or even hygienic. So unsurprisingly, our baby teeth would fall off, and I at that time still believed in tooth fairies. And almost every time I would store that tooth under my pillow, hoping that when I wake up I'd be 1 coin richer. For character designs, I guess I always imagined tooth fairies to look like Fairly Odd Parents with little bodies and crowns on them. There's actually one design that I really loved, which was the tooth fairy in Rise of the Guardians. I can't remember her name, darn it, but she was super pretty and not in a conventional way. I would have never thought to put a peacock type design with feathers to a tooth fairy, but I was really impressed with that film. If you haven't watched it, you definitely should. And if you have, Let me know down in the comments who was your favorite character from that show, because it was honestly, in a VFX point of view, a masterpiece. So a little bit about this piece right here. I guess I wanted to show that we were tooth fairies, but rather than just taking the tooth, we were cleaning it from rotten to a hole-shaped tooth with our magic brushes, hence the sparkling effect all around. And I guess I wanted to point out that I kept up with my rule of having a background related to the prompt, at least for this piece, and I don't think it's quite evident, so I just wanted to point it out. I remember when I was a kid, we would brush our teeth and we always had these shot glasses from my father, actually, that we would use to gargle. I felt like the characters were missing a little something, so I placed like tooth floss on our clothes, and for my brother I placed it as a necklace, and I think that kind of brought some more interest to our character designs, as well as made it feel a little bit more rustic and just interesting, I guess. For day 9, we have THRU, and for this one, I immediately thought of Dragon Ball. Honestly, I wanted something like a cross between Kamehameha and the water balloons, so I came up with this type of illustration, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out. I was debating between having a more dynamic pose or just a restful one, and I guess I went for the moment before, showing that we had our, I don't know what you call it, energy balls in hand, ready to throw it at our foes. This show was quite a big influence in our childhood. We would always reenact these battle scenes. Majin Buu was actually my favorite villain, not the small one or the old one, but the chubby one, because he was super cute, and honestly he felt rather neutral and not at all like an evil person. One of the favorite moves that we would always try to emulate was the fusion one, hence why I drew us cosplaying Gohan and Trunks. My brother's cosplaying as Trunks and me as Gohan, and we would legit just do fusions all day. It was just a fun little move that was super silly and very copyable. Copyable? Can be copied in real life, unlike the other moves that were just legit Super Saiyan can only do. This one was something that even a child could do. I initially planned to have a big star as a background to represent the stars in the Dragon Ball, but after doing the fancy piece, I didn't want another one with the same background, so instead I went and left it blank. I'm still debating between doing a dragon silhouette for the background or 6 stars to stick with the Dragon Ball iconic symbols. But if you have any suggestions, comment down below, or if you prefer the stars over the dragon or the dragon over the stars, let me know. I guess that's all I had to say. These were really fun to draw, and I hope it was as fun to watch for you guys. Like this video, give it a big thumbs up, share it with your art buddies because it really does help to support this channel. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss future videos. And I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye!